All right, so we've reached a deficit now of two, but I'm going to be talking about a book today. It is called From North Korea to Budapest, right? So it's an interesting book because during the 1956 revolution in Hungary, you had about a couple hundred, maybe 1,000 North Korean students there. And this would be kind of a big cultural shock. Everybody's everywhere now, but it would have been really weird to see, 1,000 Asians running around Hungary in the 50s. But anyway, so some of these students, both North Korea and Hungary at the time were socialists, right? So you could travel from North Korea to Hungary with special permission, and maybe the other way around a little bit too. But the point is, you had some North Koreans in Hungary. And so a lot of these were military-age young men who were just fresh back from the Korean War. So when the revolution broke out, you had a lot of North Korean young men helping out with the revolution against communism. That revolution was not successful, and a bunch of people started fleeing, okay? Including some of these North Koreans. Most of them did not leave, most of them did not, but one of them ended up escaping to Vienna and then to New York. So there's a North Korean who ended up going to Hungary and then fled to New York, okay? And he became the first naturalized U.S. citizen from North Korea as well. But anyways, I'm not going to read the whole thing, but this is probably the most interesting part of the book. And his name is, let me see, where's the, Zang Gi Hong, okay? And his story, so I just want to read, it's just a page of him escaping from Budapest after the revolution was sort of over. So let's see here. Mr. Zang Gi Hong's experiences of the battlefield during the Korean War were very interesting to the Hungarian military, so the young Korean was invited to the Zhínyi Military Academy to give a special lecture there. The officers and the students of the academy listened to the lecture with great interest. Mr. Zang didn't imagine at the time that, after the fall of the Hungarian Revolution, his connection with a cadet from the military academy would help him escape from Hungary. The elderly gentleman told me the following. So the rest is Mr. Zang Gi Hong's direct words. When the Russians occupied Budapest, I decided to leave. I knew a Hungarian cadet, Béla, and I told him, Béla, I want to escape. What can I do? Could you help me? He told me, Gi Hong, I have the same idea. I would like to escape too. Let's go together. I said, okay. Bartók Béla Road and Gellért Hill in Budapest were full of Russian soldiers, so I put on my hat after 6 o'clock when it was dark. Then I crossed the Gellért Hill to his house to plan our escape. He had a relative in Mosonmagyaróvár, near the Austro-Hungarian border, who served as a school principal. Béla told me that he would write a letter to his relative asking him to find a border guard who would help us cross the border. A letter came back. They had found a suitable person. So we planned to leave right away on the following day. At the last moment, his younger sister Ildi wanted to escape too, and her high school girlfriend Edith also wanted to join us. Later, she became my wife. Edith brought a bottle of vodka in case Russians caught us at the border. I brought a lot of canned Red Cross food from the dormitory, a lot of sardine cans, cheese, that kind of food. We prepared all of our belongings like Christmas packages. We camouflaged our escape as a Christmas visit to Béla's relatives in the border region. That morning, I left the dormitory early, and I timed my arrival so I wouldn't have to wait on the platform because otherwise the Russians and pro-Soviet Hungarian authorities would catch me. So I timed it exactly before the train left and just jumped in. Béla was nervous. He looked for me on the platform and asked where is Gi Hong. Just as the train was leaving, I jumped in. Béla brought cards, and we played on the train. We finally arrived in Mosonmagyaróvár. I'm going to say that 3 times fast. Béla's relatives had a big house there. When we arrived at the house, it was full of Russians who were cooking their dinner. Béla was so nice and tried to protect me. He took me immediately somewhere to a farmhouse. An old man was there. He looked at me and said he could not take me. He said, "If I take him, I will be shot." Finally, 4 of us slept there all together in a big bed. I was very nervous, so I couldn't sleep. The next morning, 3 young boys shouted up to us. The youngest was around 13 years old, another was 14 or 15, and the oldest was 16. Young kids looking for adventure. They told us to follow them, and we walked together about 4 or 5 hours to reach the border. We crossed many cornfields. It took about 4 or 5 hours. The boys said that the guard changed around 11 or 12 o'clock. So at that time, we escaped. After we crossed the border, one of the boys cried out that we are now in a free country, but I thought that he was trying to call the Russians. So I grabbed his neck to shut him up. I looked back, and Russian soldiers were coming with machine guns, but we had already crossed the border. Fortunately, they understood international law. Edith's father had been to America, so she had some dollars. Because of this, we could buy bus tickets from the border town to Vienna. When we arrived, we were invited for a nice dinner to Bela's uncle, who worked for the Austrian government there. After dinner, Edith and I left for a refugee camp for Hungarian students. At that time, many Hungarian refugees were in Vienna. They told us to follow them, and they took us to a Danish refugee camp. It was Christmas Eve, and a tall guy touched my shoulder. He was Barry Farber. Now, I don't want to read any more, but the interesting thing is I was doing a little bit more research, and Barry Farber was, I think, some American journalist or something, who ended up randomly finding this Asian-looking guy in the camps. And he thought, oh, it must be some correspondent from Japan or some kind of aid worker from Philippines or something. But then it turned out that, no, this was a foreign exchange student from Hungary who escaped. And I found this is on archive.org, but it's a Newsmax article from 2006 by Barry Farber himself, and it recounts his story of finding this guy, in the camps. So I just want to read one or two paragraphs. It's just such a great story. Suddenly I notice a young man with Asian features. So this is Barry Farber in one of these camps in Vienna that this Asian guy was in. Suddenly I notice a young man with Asian features across the room. I figured he was a Japanese newsman or a Thai Red Cross worker until the Hungarians sat in a circle on the floor and began singing one of those European student songs which calls for linking arms and swaying back and forth. The Asian man sat on the floor, linked arms, and sang right along with them in Hungarian. Either a hallucination, I thought, or that the man had just escaped from Hungary with them. So basically, this North Korean's like, okay, I want to go to America now, right? So they end up going to America, and he becomes, he becomes an architect. And one of the things here is that, let's see here. It says, well, I can't find it, but basically he became an architect, and he ended up designing a lot of the homes in the Hamptons, like near New York, right? So if you go there, I guess a bunch of the houses are designed by this guy. But this was an interesting story because when we came to Houston, we ended up meeting a woman who, not during the revolution, but a couple years before, escaped from Hungary to Austria. And her leg was blown off because she accidentally stepped on a landmine. A lot of the guides that you hired, maybe they turn you back in, that sort of thing. This one just didn't know where he was going, so, this woman I knew ended up with her leg blown off. Another thing was, and I probably mentioned this before, but my great-uncle was a radio operator during the Revolution. He wasn't in the country, but he was broadcasting in, and well, one day I'll take a look at some of his stuff, because it's online now. Everything's been uploaded. And I'll listen to some of those broadcasts, but he ended up, he was on the radio. So at the same time that this North Korean guy was in Hungary, my great-uncle was broadcasting into Hungary, right? A Radio Free Europe. But anyway, so that's interesting. One of the articles that this is linked from another article, and I had to find it on archive.org. But the original thing that this linked to, there's somebody who says that they are the daughter of this man, right? Because he ended up marrying a Hungarian woman who escaped with her, with yeah, it was. So this daughter says that she has an email address. I'm thinking I'm gonna just email this person and say, hey, I saw a picture of this guy in 2017. I don't know if he's still alive, right? He could still be alive, right? I just want to know, hey, did you know my great uncle? Did you know about him back in Hungary? Did you ever meet him up in New York? Because my great uncle ended up going to New York as well. He ended up, New York, New Jersey, somewhere around there. So because of that, it'd be kind of interesting, Did you know the guy who ran the Hungarian bookstore in New York? There were actually two, but that's another topic for another day. So yeah, that's basically it. This was a fun book from North Korea to Budapest. It was, I'll link to all this, the articles and everything. And that's basically it. So, deficit of two videos. I didn't do one yesterday, but hey, this was fun. So anyways, I'll make it up at some point, hopefully.